Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Learning with Leverage webinar series. My name is Dave Hughes. I'm Director of Product Management for Leverage, which is the service corporation for the League of Southeastern Credit Unions and Affiliates. Today, as you can see on your screen, hopefully, we have a webinar titled Fraud Schemes and Scams, Industry Trends and Consortium Solutions. Our presenter is Mr. Corey Lynch. He's a product expert with NASDAQ Verafin. And let me tell you a little bit about Corey. Since joining NASDAQ Verafin in 2014, Corey has spent years working closely with financial institutions to understand their unique product needs and identify areas for future product development. As an integral member of sales, product, and marketing, Corey now shares his wealth of product knowledge with potential customer partners to help them identify the best solutions for their institutions. Corey is passionate, and I can attest to that, about empowering NASDAQ Verafin customers to achieve their goals and stopping financial crime. So a little housekeeping. Feel free to ask questions at any time throughout the webinar, and you can put those in the chat. And I will occasionally be letting Corey know that we have a question or two. We will also have some time at the end for Q&A. So with that, let's turn it over to Corey.
Absolutely, Dave. Thank you so much for inviting me here today. I'm really excited to go through this. And particularly when I go through and I see we have people joining us from several different states today, when we talk about fraud, schemes, and scams, really, they don't know borders, not in this day and age. So institutions and from all over, and indeed credit unions from the West Coast to the East Coast and everywhere in between are seeing the same types of events. So as an industry, it's really important that we have presentations like this and we get to speak and learn from each other, which is why I'd like to say, as we go through today, yes, again, to reiterate, any questions or comments, please feel free to use that chat interface in Zoom. It's there for a reason. And oh, George is also here as well. So yes, we're well represented here today. And with that, we're going to dive into fraud schemes and scams, look at some industry trends, and then consortium solutions. And we'll talk about what that means. But ultimately, we want to ensure that we're starting to harness the power of technology, just like the financial criminals are. Now, of course, when I say that, it's very easy to say that because the financial criminals are unburdened by regulations of any sort. They can do whatever they wish with technology. We certainly have rules and regulations we need to follow, but when you properly vet and choose the correct technology and layer it onto the correct problem, you can fight fire with fire and ultimately win the war against those financial criminals. And that's why we're here today. So let's go through. Oh, this is an older picture. If I was to host a real estate show on Netflix, this would be the banner you would see up there. Corey Lynch is selling Sunset this fall on Netflix. So we'll move past that old photo and come right here. So just a little bit about Verafin before we start. Our core purpose here at NASDAQ Verafin is to fight crime. And that harkens back to some classical threats. And of course, today we're going to talk about things like good old-fashioned check fraud. It hasn't gone anywhere. It's just analog moved into the digital world. But we also know that each and every year there are new ways to move and steal money. And increasingly, these things are more complex to detect. They cross institutions, they cross channels, they cross borders. We're talking about things like human trafficking, terrorism, elder abuse, fraud rings, and scams. Particular things that require a more full view of your transaction and the situation at hand. So while we're always well poised to fight those traditional threats, we know each and every year we need to evolve, just like the financial criminals evolve in almost real time. And who does that? Well, we have about 2,500 customers that use NASDAQ Verafin today. And of course, that's an important part of our story because that ensures that we have the data and the leverage. Oh, see how I'm going to try and pepper the word leverage several times in today, Dave.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. But we can leverage that data in new and profound ways. And how do we do that? Well, I won't read through this monster slide here, but NASDAQ Verafin offers a full suite of fraud detection and anti-money laundering tools. And other than that, I'm going to move past here because we'll have ample time to talk about some of the tools that we've built, some of the things we'd like to share with you. We're firm believers here at NASDAQ Verafin that by talking about the problems and some of the solutions we've devised, institutions can look at incorporating any of that into their own particular programs. It's all about learning from us and us learning from you. A lot of the things you see today have come out from things that we've learned from both our customers and through webinars like this. So please feel free to not only listen today, but to also share any insights you might have. They are critical to our understanding of the problem. So let's look at the global epidemic that is fraud. And I think every American can agree that almost no one is untouched by fraud these days, whether it's directly you or it's someone you know. Fraud schemes and scams are hitting absolutely everyone. And ultimately, financial crime does evolve rapidly in this day and age, which is why you need to closely follow emerging trends. And that's part of what we're talking about today. Ron Popeil, famous legendary pitchman, would often sell a food dehydrator. And his main thing was set it and forget it. Well, that does work when you're dehydrating meat. However, when you're trying to have a really comprehensive anti-financial crime program, you can't set it and forget it. In this day and age, it is constant evolution that is required and a constant understanding of the problem. Now, NASDAQ Verafin has spent a lot of time studying this problem. And actually in 2024, we released the Global Financial Crime Report. And this really looks at all of the illicit activity that underpins a lot of the criminal activity that we see. And I would encourage everybody to check this report out. And there's a number of reasons for that. Certainly, it's the scope of the crime, but even more importantly, as we go through today, we'll also talk about the human face of the crimes. And particularly when we talk about the credit union space today, it is so important because credit unions and members is such an important relationship. And we want to make sure that we keep the human element of the crime because there is no such thing as a victimless financial crime. There's always a victim. So understanding that it's not just numbers, it's not just statistics, but there are humans behind this. And ultimately, the reason we spend so much time talking about what we do is because we can concentrate on that human element, because it's all about ensuring that we have less victims, and the victims we do have, we have the proper means to ensure that they actually become survivors of these events. So in 2023, consumer fraud scams caused $43.6 billion in losses globally. And that's a startling number. And a lot of these things tend to be what you would say might be similar flavors of the same crime. Things like business email compromise, romance scams. Fraud schemes target people every day from every walk of life. And of course, these are potentially life-changing consequences depending on how much is actually extracted, but also who is being targeted. And roughly 15% of American households, and that's 20 million homes, have reported falling victim to a financial fraud scheme. Now, the thing we often see when we look in the media, we see the big scores. A business loses $20 million, and that's a headline. But on average, these crimes are about $575. And I think when we talk about the human element of the crime, that's important. Because some people look at that number and say $575, well, that's not too bad a loss. You can absorb that. But the fact is, of all US households, 37% cannot cover an expense over $400. So when a member loses $575, for some people, that's just a mild embarrassment. For some people, that is particularly devastating. So that's why we need to remember that the technology is there to protect everyone, those who can perhaps afford to take some type of loss and those who really cannot. It's about applying the same protections to every single person. And financial organizations are crucial frontline defense. Remember, all of the technology that we talk about today, the one thing we have is a financial transaction. There is a trail. And while criminals do exploit that interconnected nature of the financial system, ultimately, institutions are on the front line of defense. And that's the best opportunity we have to stop these crimes. But to do that, you really do need to understand the typologies, the indicators, and also some of the innovations and technological innovations that are essential in this day and age for effective action. So let's talk a little bit about AI and fraud trends. And again, any questions you have today as I go through, or if there's something that's particularly compelling that you've seen within your own organization, please let us know today. We'd love to have a dialogue with the folks who are tuning in today. And Dave's the man. He's on it because I'm a bit of a Canadian freight train. When I start speaking, I get excited, but Dave's going to keep us on track today. Thank you, Dave. All right, so let's look at fraudsters using AI. So in this day and age, AI, it's really allowing criminals to scale in a way they've never seen before. It allows them to conduct scams with relative ease and sophistication. They can actually leverage technology to create perfect emails to perpetuate their frauds. And of course, not only that, when we talk about personalized messaging at a very large scale, remember, today we have voice and video cloning. And as you can imagine, those things are really fun to play with when you're in ChatGPT. It's fun to create a trailer for a movie you always wished existed. But the fraudsters are doing that. So in real time, they can call grandparents and pretend that they're grandkids who are in a foreign land who need money now, creating that sense of urgency. So it's important to understand that while all of that technology is available, there's technology available to us as well. So how can we understand the typologies and lay the correct technology in here to ensure that we are keeping pace? Because if there's a way to communicate with members today, it is being exploited, whether it's a text message, an email, a social media gaming opportunity, it is being exploited. So it's very difficult to think you exist in a day and age where everything you do has the possibility of being a scheme or a scam. But of course, the boon of technology means that that's where we are today. So that's why we need to have these discussions. So let's talk about some of the key typologies and indicators. And this is where I always get excited because now I know we're going to talk about things that you have seen within your own four walls or things that have impacted you directly, whether you or someone you know and love. So good old business email compromise. Again, it is something that has been around for quite some time. But we know that business email compromise now, the growing sophistication and technology behind that has really seen an increase of fraud scams on digital channels. So business email compromise is a case in point, right? Social engineering is a big part of this. Socially engineering an opportunity to speak to someone, to have them either create a transaction or divert funds, and that can cause massive losses. But I can guarantee you, everything someone needs to learn about a financial institution is probably on the financial institution's homepage. Who is who? And then if you log into LinkedIn, who reports to who? Very easy to piece these things together. And I know in my own life, I have received emails from my CEO asking me to divert funds. Now, thankfully, they don't let me in charge of transferring money because that would be devastating. But the fraudsters send these out in massive quantities. They're only looking to hit the person who is the decision maker. So ultimately, everything they need to perpetuate this scheme and scam is online. That's where it exists. So they're mining the internet. They're learning about the CEO. They're learning about the CFO, and they're learning who they need to hit in order to perpetuate this scheme. Of course, impersonation is a big reason they do this. And that might be to request a fraudulent payment. We have a new payment. It needs to go out. Oh, by the way, the sense of urgency is here. This needs to go out today. Or they may have an awareness that there is a transfer coming and they want to divert that transfer to a new account. And that's the age-old, hey, can't wait to get that payment. By the way, our account and routing number has changed. Would you mind sending it here instead? And that's a surefire tip that something may be amiss. So the losses to business email compromise, they really are considerable. In 2023, according to the NASDAQ Financial Crime Report, 2023, 67% of cyber-enabled scam losses were the result of business email compromise. And as you look at here, 6.7 billion out of 10 billion, specifically in the US. Wow, that's a tremendous figure. And again, that's just one flavor of what is essentially the same crime being perpetuated against different individuals or different entities. And when we look at the losses themselves, while we look at some of the frauds, and when we talk about things like check fraud tends to these days be more of a problem in the Americas. Specifically, it's a huge problem in the United States. And if we could see everybody today and I said, who's seeing some check fraud, I'm sure every hand would go up immediately. But when we look at something like business email compromise, as we can see, that's impacting every area. We've got the Americas, 3.4 billion, Europe, 2.1 billion, Asia Pacific, 1.3 billion. And again, staggering losses. But against businesses who can at times absorb those losses. They may have insurance against these losses. It's also the individuals that we need to keep in mind. So business email compromise, listen, it affects your reputation if you're a business, certainly the growth of an organization, perhaps the career path of a certain individual who lets a payment go. But ultimately, it's all about someone in the public arena no longer having confidence. And again, as a trusted partner, when one of those particular entities is your member or your customer, what they expect is they expect you to help protect their reputation and have the technology in place to keep them safe, which is difficult when they have knowingly sent a payment to a fraudster. That makes your job even harder. So FinCEN's analysis indicates that individual home buyers are disproportionately affected in this particular case, business email compromise. And of course, the real estate sector is rife for this, because what you typically see are larger payments going through, whether large down payments for a home or sometimes people buying a home outright. And we often pick out certain groups and think about certain groups as being targets for this activity, when everyone is certainly a target. But you don't need to be unfamiliar with technology. For instance, this is Lila Jones. And when we talk about the human face of the crime, this is why it's important to share. Because when we talk about victims of schemes and scams, oftentimes there's a significant amount of embarrassment from having fallen to a scheme or a scam. So it's so important when someone's willing to speak out, to talk about their experience, because those are learning experiences for everybody. And Lila Jones is a perfect example. Lila is a sales professional at Google. So she is intimately familiar with technology, and she nearly lost a $130,000 payment in a BEC scam, which is very, very common, to see someone impersonate a title company and to divert that payment away from the title company itself. And Lila was prepared. She did additional checks before she sent this particular payment. She even called the title company to see if this payment was actually destined for the correct place, but she never heard back. So she went and remitted the payment regardless. And when she went to pick up the keys to her new home, of course, her stomach dropped. Now, in this case, it was a rare happy ending. Lila did get most of the funds back, but you can't take that for granted, right? Don't assume it can't be you or that your financial institution can get these funds back. In the day and age we live with fast or instant payments, which are coming, when we talk about fast or instant payments and the irrevocable nature of those, nobody is above being scammed, and it's getting harder and harder to get those funds back, particularly if they've arrived in a domestic fashion or if they've arrived in an international channel, because once those funds make their way overseas, then you're looking at a very difficult process to get those back. So your members' financial activity, it really is the key to detecting business email compromise. And when we say that, that is so important to keep in mind, because when we talk about detection, listen, when you log in and you knowingly send a payment, authentication controls are moot, right? I have logged in, I have sent a payment. But again, what we always have is that unique transaction. Now, oftentimes we know that it's actually a known entity from within an institution sending those payments or receiving those payments. Ultimately, you need to understand that full transaction, beginning and end, and then you can ascertain the risk. Because if there's one thing I know, if you're a member at a credit union, you're probably well known. You've probably been vetted. You know who your members are. What you don't know is anything about those counterparties. And that's where the true risk actually lies. So when we talk about business email compromise, it's really important to understand those potential indicators and then also start to look at mixing these indicators together to look for possibly fraudulent transactions. It's very difficult to say, well, every time someone sends a payment to someone new, we need an alert. That causes a nightmare, both for customers who expect funds to go, but from an operations standpoint, people start calling in. Why isn't my money sent? Why isn't my money being remitted right now? But when you actually can start to mix together the potential indicators, what you can do is raise the risk of a transaction depending on which indicator is present and also how many of those indicators are present, because that allows you to move away from what would be a false positive, I'm sending money to Dave the first time, it's the first time we've ever done it, to we need to protect Corey, who's sending to an unknown entity? What do we know about that entity? So you need to start to combine things together. So some indicators that we look for: transfers initiated near the end of the day or cutoff windows. In this day and age, of course, everybody goes home at 5. Perhaps what they're really trying to do is make sure that this payment goes out right at the end of the day. So anything suspicious, that's not going to be looked at till tomorrow. Large wire funds or transfers to the recipient of a company that's never been dealt with before, and particularly never seen before, not only for a particular member, but also across a credit union itself, right? It's really important to be able to say that. Have we ever seen this entity interact with anybody in our own four walls? If the answer is no, there is enhanced risk. If the routing details have been changed, that is a surefire indicator that something may be amiss. This is not always, people do it all the time, but it's an indicator. And the receiving account does not have an established history of receiving payments. So what we're talking about there is the receiving account. We have money coming in. They don't typically see these large payments coming in. Why do we see this all of a sudden? Perhaps we actually have a mule account that's trying to divert these funds. So those are some of the indicators that we look at depending on the direction of the payment. But again, important to balance these because there is a risk reward when it comes to fraud. You can't stop every transaction. So how do you choose which transactions you actually need to stop? And that's where consortium solutions come into play. But that's a spoiler warning, because now we want to talk a little bit about romance scams. Romance scams, particularly devastating to the victims. Essentially, the fraudsters will take any action necessary to deceive their victims. And it is the world's fastest growing fraud trend. And there's lots of reasons for that. But ultimately, a lot of it is people are trusting in nature. They want to believe they've met someone good online. And these particular criminals will build a relationship over months and months in order to extricate the funds that they require to have a very successful fraud day. So fraudsters will contact through any means necessary. And as I said, it can be social media, online forums, dating sites. So given the work I do, I speak to my mother a lot. I'm very fortunate. My mother lives in an in-law suite downstairs, and I get to spend a lot of time talking about what I do. My mother's very self-aware. So one day she said, "Corey, I'm on Facebook. Oh my, the number of young men who reach out to me on Facebook, you wouldn't believe it." And she laughs because she's aware at this point that that's a scam. But she also came home one day with a letter she had received in the mail, a snail mail scam. That is still happening. So whether it's a social media, an online forum, a dating site, or your mailbox, you are being totally hit by these fraudsters. And that's very difficult, again, specifically for certain customer groups who may have less familiarity with technology. So, of course, feigning love or some type of dire circumstance, money requests in these schemes can start very low and then typically escalate. We need more funds. We need more funds. And it's particularly devastating because this is someone who's already had an emotional event in many cases, and they're looking to fill something, a void that's been left. And that's what happened with Debbie Montgomery Johnson. Debbie's 65, and now she's a fraud awareness advocate. And we're so fortunate to have people like Debbie who have worked with us to build this report. Because again, after losing her husband, Debbie lost over $1 million in a romance scam by someone she met for online dating. She would chat with this person for hours and hours. She spoke with his sister, friends. And while looking back on it, Debbie was aware that there were lots of red flags. She was so in love that all she saw were rainbows and unicorns at the time. She was in love with someone. And of course, this person said, "Debbie, I love you too. I want to move to the US. I just don't have the money." And you know, you would help someone you love in any way possible. And never negate the fact that these are real feelings that someone has. Just because it's come online, it's begun online. And of course, I'm old enough to remember before there was online dating. I remember when people used to put VHS tapes in the mail for online dating. But now it's so easy to go onto an online dating site, and it's really a treasure trove of potential victims for fraudsters. Debbie did everything. She sold jewelry. She divested herself of investments from her retirement accounts. She did everything because she trusted that this person would get the funds back to her, and she was going to be with the love of her life after a particularly devastating loss. And unfortunately, that money was not recovered. So romance scams, well, they caused about 3.8 billion in estimated global losses with other confidence schemes. And they represent a fraction of the losses, less than 9% of scams, but the emotional toll is immense. And I think one of the other things as we talk about this, and I would be remiss not to mention that when we talk about the scale of this crime, given how emotional these crimes are and how reticent victims are at times to report these crimes, the numbers that we show you are representative of the known crimes. We actually think the crime and the scale of the crimes is much larger, but the victims are reticent for many reasons to report this, whether it's from embarrassment or if it's a family member that's perpetuated something. But the victims themselves have psychological, emotional distress, and will even at times commit physical harm to themselves. And of course, from Debbie's case, losing the money was obviously devastating, as she told us. But what's worse is what it does to your heart and your trust. Just like all schemes and scams, quick intervention is crucial in this particular case. And again, it's also crucial to have that end-to-end view of the transaction. When you reach out to someone like Debbie, they want this money to go. This is the love of their lives. So what you need is insight beyond what can be provided by the actual initiator of that transaction. When you call the member, you need to know what's happening outside of what they're telling you, because they're not always telling you the whole story. And what that involves is training. So one of the things that we always advocate is having a very strong training program as to how to tactfully inquire with your customer about what's happening, whether they're withholding information voluntarily or they've been told to withhold information. Having a well-trained staff to deal with these particular issues is critical. And as I go through these key questions, that reminds me, Dave, I'm going to ask once more, if anybody has any questions today, please feel free to put those in the Q&A chat window. We have a webinar chat window, so please, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to address those today. And I'll always address them after if you have questions. You can certainly find me anywhere. So key questions. If you're training someone, how did you meet this person? How has the relationship progressed? Has it been slowly or quickly? What in-person plans have you had with this person? Where do they live and work? How does your family feel about the relationship? How is the relationship financially? Can you describe any requests for funds or account details? Again, it's really trying to understand what we're seeing here, but also has the person themselves consistently made plans to meet and then had to cancel those plans? Does that happen a lot, where they promise to meet and you're almost ready to meet? So that's all an important piece of the story. And asking key questions like this in a compassionate manner is really how you get information out of the victims. And then monitor financial activity in real time. Monitoring financial activity in real time, such as any type of faster payment or any type of digital payment, doing that is critical to stopping this particular scheme and scam. When we talk about the potential indicators, funds transfers to international locations that have never been seen in the past can certainly be a potential indicator. Having said that, it is not uncommon and it is actually more common to see a domestic hop or two between institutions before funds make their way overseas. So that's what, when we, again, talk about balancing indicators, you can't just look for international location payments, because so much of this actually begins with a domestic hop for one of those digital channels. Funds transfers to crypto exchanges. Absolutely. Crypto is not well understood by probably most of the population. So when something involves crypto exchanges, that is a telltale sign that something may be amiss, especially if someone is unfamiliar with technology. Large ATM withdrawals are another thing that we tend to look for. Client uncharacteristically using the lines of credit, or if they start pulling from their investments all of a sudden. Again, we know, depending on the age of the customer, sometimes a customer is slowly pulling from their investments as a part of their retirement. Well, do you see a change in the volume of that activity? Are they pulling out those investments faster? Important to look for. Large purchases at locations that process funds transfers or perhaps sell gift cards, that type of thing. Escalating funds transfers to a relatively new recipient, especially if located overseas. So again, a new recipient, again, not uncommon. We all pay bills digitally, but if you send money once and then you send it again and it's a little more money, and you send it again, it's a little more money, that type of escalation is very common to see in a romance scam. All right, financial grooming. Now, financial grooming, we do include as its own scheme and scam, but again, this is something that is prescient today, but is actually a new take on an investment scam. But billions of dollars are lost to investment scams each and every year. And no surprise, the numbers are growing. And that's according to the FTC in 2023. As you can see, 1.7 billion to 3.8 billion to $4.6 billion in 2023. And I don't think anybody would ever take the over and under that this is going to go down. This will go up again in further FTC Trade Commission reports. So financial grooming is also called pig butchering. Now, I will tell you personally that that is a term that I do not enjoy using. Of course, that is from the notion that you are fattening up the pig before the kill. And that's something that actually we took from the financial criminals themselves. And it was adopted as the name for this scheme and scam. But the reason I don't like it is, as you can imagine, if you're trying to have a delicate conversation with someone, you certainly would never open with the line, "I think you've been pig butchered." I mean, when we talk about a feeling of doing something wrong or being embarrassed by having taken part in a scheme or a scam, a name like that just exacerbates the situation. So financial grooming, that's the term I prefer. Pig butchering, it sounds good in the news media, but it's not the way that we really want to talk about this. And certainly we never want to talk about this with members in this particular fashion. Now, how are these particular schemes and scams perpetuated, and how are they a little different? Well, first, the victims are contacted through any number of means. Again, if there's a way to contact someone, it is being exploited for nefarious purposes. As we sit here today, there's my phone. I was going to say, it looks like I'm holding up nothing. But as we sit here today, you're probably getting the odd text message from UPS that you have an important delivery. You just need to click a link. So if there's a device for communication, it's being exploited. And not only that, as a part of this, once the exploitation has begun, the victim is convinced to purchase an investment that involves cryptocurrency and a high rate of return. Of course, cryptocurrency, again, is not well understood by almost the majority of the population at this point. There's a nascent understanding of this for a very small group of people. Even those who purport to be quite adept with cryptocurrency possibly don't understand the intricacies of this in the way possible. And then when we talk about using things like mixers, the ability to obfuscate funds and digital wallets, things become even more complex. Now, as I've said, the scammers refer to the victims as pigs. They fatten them up. That's where the butchering comes from. I would be remiss to say we should ever use that. Outside of a professional setting, you never want a victim to hear something like that. And of course, no surprise, once you've sent those funds off, the investment opportunity is fake and the funds are stolen. And crypto exchanges, even those that we can trust, but particularly fake crypto exchanges that are created by fraudsters, is a real thing. That is something that needs to be tracked. So when you see someone who has possibly never had anything to do with crypto in the past, and all of a sudden we see funds going to an exchange, that is an example of something you might want to look into. Oftentimes, even these fake crypto exchanges have apps or full websites. The actual victims themselves can log in. They can see their investments growing before them. They think they're making money. And of course, it's all an obfuscation. The money's already been stolen. It's already being most likely laundered through another institution. But of course, when you log in and you see your investment growing, what are you apt to do? To send even more money, because you've probably hit it quite big. So at some point for all the victims, it does become, unfortunately, very clear that they have been scammed and that the money is gone. And oftentimes at that point, if we're waiting for the victim to realize that, it is far too late. And not only that, sometimes we have this lone wolf view of fraud. There's fraudsters that are committing crimes, and that is true. There are people who are individuals who are really committed to stealing money and perpetuating these schemes and scams. But we also know that criminal organizations are causing massive losses. In this case, cyber scams are huge, and some particular scam organizations have made millions of dollars off a single scam. So, of course, this is big business. Not only that, they exploit labor trafficking victims to target millions of Americans. And this is possibly the scariest thing that we see. When we look at labor trafficking and human trafficking, what we see is a real confluence of events where human trafficking or labor trafficking victims are actually made to work in a center where they are then victims who are on the phone training other victims to give them funds, talking them into giving them money. So it's actual double victimhood, which is even scarier, that someone would be victimized, have to work in a call center where they can't leave, where the conditions are probably not very good. And what are they doing? They're calling elderly folks across the United States, trying to extricate funds from them. So that is why this is such a huge issue, because it's not just one victim in this case of pig butchering or financial grooming. It's often multiple victims. And again, when we talk about the indicators for this, the financial indicators are really the key to this, being able to follow the transaction. So some of the potential indicators, particularly if you're lucky enough to have a conversation, the client mentions a new contact referring them to a lucrative investment opportunity. And of course, it involves virtual currency, total red flag. And again, that's the client mentioning that. You can also see that within the transactional details itself. Oftentimes, you need to get a forewarning to actually contact the particular customer or the client. The client has no history of using virtual currency attempts to purchase large amounts of virtual currency, or again, they're liquidating savings, retirement funds, and attempting to wire those proceeds to a virtual asset provider or convert the funds to a virtual currency. So those are some really good indicators of this more new type of investment scam. And again, let's never underestimate how critical it is to prey on someone's misunderstanding of things. Cryptocurrency is a great example. I will bet dollars to donuts again that 99% of the population does not understand cryptocurrency, even though it is everywhere in our lives these days. Now what I want to do is actually target in, before I do, anyone with questions. I'm going to say this a few times today. I know I'm trying not to speak fast, Dave, because sometimes I get excited and I speak Canadian speed. Today, I'm trying a new process where I speak a little more slowly for people. As I do that, I'm trying to leave us more time for questions. So again, if you have a question about what you've seen today, or if you've seen something like this within your own institution, let us know, and we'd love to hear from you. So elder schemes and scams. So this is particularly devastating. So this represents a customer population that is growing in the United States, and oftentimes a senior savings combined with a reliance on others and a lack of technical knowledge can actually put them at a higher risk for scams. It's just a mixture of things, right? You might have feelings of loneliness, perhaps feelings of cognitive decline. Again, an unfamiliarity with technology. And it's not one of these things that we typically see. It can be a number of these things together, when balanced, make an extremely attractive target for the financial criminals. So again, I don't think I can say this enough today. Executed by persons close to them, which of course is tragic enough. But again, any means of communication that is being used by your elderly customers is certainly being exploited by the fraudsters. We know that. So the seniors themselves are often duped into providing online banking credentials to the fraudsters themselves. It's a great way to start a scam. If you will just let me into your account, give me all of your details, I can take care of things, particularly prescient when we talk about things like imposter scams. I'm calling from your bank. I need your banking information. Now, of course, we know that a credit union is never going to call their customers and say, can you give me all the information about your accounts? We know that. But oftentimes members are not that aware of that, right? Which is why education plays such a key role, and pretty confident that all of you have good education programs in place today to let members know when they will and won't be asked for things. But once we've stolen that data, allowing fraudsters to open accounts or access online banking in the victim's name, it's really problematic because, again, once you have access, these look like legitimate transactions. It's one thing to remotely take over someone's computer from a different area. There are things we can do. We can track IP logs. We can look at authentication controls that are in place. You can balance biometrics in this day and age. But when a victim has been used as an unwitting mule or they're willingly sending funds out of their account, authentication controls become somewhat moot. Because, of course, you have a victim who is knowingly remitting funds themselves. So when we look at the scams types reported in elder financial exploitation by percentage, you can see it does run the gamut. So 8% for impersonation schemes and scams, probably something we're going to see grow with the advent of more and more technology. Being able to use video spoofing in real time, impersonation is going to grow in scope. Romance scams, of course, is a huge, huge issue, and I'm sure our institutions tuning in today have seen that. Tech support scams, again, quick story. My mother phoned my aunt one day and said, her name was Patsy. She said, Pats, what are you doing? My Aunt Patsy said, I'm on the phone with Microsoft. There's something wrong with my computer. And she was on her landline and the cell phone at the same time. And my mother said, hang up right now. And again, my aunt, who was very trusting, she was a wonderful lady who trusted people all the time. That is someone who is rife for being taken advantage of. And only for the chance that someone phoned her at the same time and told her to stop this, that was a guaranteed victim for the fraudster. Account takeover is another big one. And then there are so many types of schemes and scams, different flavors of the same crime, that we see about 28% there for all of those various schemes and scams together. So oftentimes, again, tied to criminal networks perpetuate these schemes and scams, again, sometimes using victims from labor trafficking. In 2023, 77.7 billion of all losses were linked to elderly victims. And again, vastly underreported. 1 in 10 elderly Americans every year is estimated to be impacted, but that is the tip of the iceberg. We often don't see the full scope of the problem. I don't want to report it because it's a lack of confidence that it wasn't my fault. And particularly for elderly customers, this can be very devastating. So we talked about a $575 loss being something that's hard to absorb. Oftentimes with schemes and scams and financial grooming, we will see losses in the thousands and thousands of dollars. Oftentimes for these particular customer groups, they have the income they have, and that's what they've earmarked to enjoy their golden years. And their earning years are behind them. So it can be particularly devastating to lose a large chunk of what you need to enjoy those years. So again, careful consideration of financial indicators is essential. There are behavioral and transactional red flags. So when we look at this, we have older client appears frantic and mentions needing to send funds urgently for an emergency, or they really don't want to tell you why they're sending something because oftentimes they've been coached. Don't tell anybody within the credit union why you're sending this money. They won't want to send the money, so don't tell them. Try and do this with as much obfuscation as possible. Older client making uncharacteristic financial decisions, and you also can't contact them on the phone. There's no way to get a hold of them. Or making frequent large withdrawals, especially from dormant accounts or accounts that have been there for quite some time, and then attempting to initiate high-value wires or purchase large numbers of gift cards. And that's why when you're monitoring those transactions, volume plays such an important part in monitoring for elder financial exploitation. Volume across channels. Perhaps you have a customer who is typically using ACH to remit some bill payments every month. All of a sudden, you see an increase in ACH. Well, what's the reason for that? These types of accounts typically for this particular member population, they have the same money coming in and out every month, the same few bills, they're buying the same things. So when something is uncharacteristic and the volume raises, that's a clear sign that something could be happening. Whether it's someone they know initiating funds transfers and stealing money, or if they're initiating funds to send them overseas. Gift cards, another great example. Oftentimes, those gift cards are from POS purchases. Well, if you're looking at POS purchases of maybe $70 or $80 a week, and all of a sudden we see $500 POS purchases every day at Walmart. Well, that's something you want to investigate because that's a clear sign that something is amiss. And most likely there are gift cards being purchased and sent to someone who's enjoying the proceeds of the crimes. So that is to paint the picture of some of the things we're dealing with. And when we look across our cloud, and again, Verafin has about 2,500 customers, and we monitor over 1 billion transactions each and every week. So we do have a pretty good handle on what our customers are seeing. And also, of course, that global financial crime trend report really did paint the global scope of what we're witnessing. So how do you detect it? Well, again, we've talked about technology. So financial institutions must deploy effective fraud controls in this day and age, and you need to innovate to stay ahead of evolving crime. The scammers themselves, they prefer in this day and age wire, ACH, or instant payments, because the recovery of those funds is more difficult. Typically, when we see an instant payment in particular, it is instant and it is irrevocable. So if you can get those funds out the door, you're simply not going to be able to get them back. It might take a note from God. So it's really important to understand that the irrevocable nature has been a real benefit for members. It is a even bigger benefit for financial criminals. And knowing the risk of the receiving account in many instances is crucial to prevention. Because when you think about it, you know your members, you know who they are. In many cases, they've been members for years. You may have members whose kids are now members, and that is a powerful relationship. And you know everything about that. But what about the other end of that transaction? And oftentimes, single institutions really have a limited visibility into what's happening outside their own institution. And that is irrespective of institution size. That is for the smallest credit unions in the United States and the largest financial institutions. There is limited visibility as to what's taking place outside your own four walls. Of course, that makes sense. In this day and age, when we're talking about, consortium data, well, I want to protect my members' data. I want to protect PII. Well, there are ways to protect PII and share intelligent insights in frameworks that are safe for everybody. And that's what consortium analytics do. They drastically improve the detection and prevention of financial crimes, all of the ones we've talked about today. And that's because a consortium data allows you to have that complete view of an entire transaction. Sorry, someone's trying to update my Teams as I speak. NASDAQ Verafin trying to enforce updates during a webinar. Get out of here. All right, so you need to have the complete view of risk across a transaction. So what we've been able to do is use insights from millions of counterparties, from thousands of institutions in the consortium. But you need to do it in a way that never shares PII, because we know for a fact when we talk about your members' data, listen, you certainly use that data, absolutely. And you're also stewards of that data, and you take those protections very seriously. So how can we protect data but still share insights? Because that, as I've said, that interconnected nature of the financial system, that is what is being exploited by the fraudsters today. So we need to be able to ensure that that interconnected nature of the financial system can also be used to combat them in safe ways. We don't have to worry about they don't have to worry about rules and regulations. We do. So that's why it's important to look for new frameworks. And that's why we use consortium data. Now, I'm going to talk about how we built our consortium data. That's the experience I have. I would encourage everybody to look out consortium data sets that may be beneficial to your organization. But I'll talk about how we've done it. So when you have those conversations, you're well aware of what goes into building these important counterparty understandings across thousands of institutions. Now, the way we've handled it, of course, we ingest our customers' rich demographic files and payment transactions. And this is common for any purveyor of what happens in the industry. You're bringing in absolutely everything. A lot of those, of course, have rich details. Now, With our customers, that's a bit different, right? So of course, not only do you get payment transactions, you're also importing absolutely everything, CDD data, data from the core, and all of that helps you build an account profile, including statistical details for payments across all channels. So that gives you the understanding of every member within your institution, the volumes of activity that are acceptable, the people that they normally interact with. That's how we understand what's normal and what isn't. So we use that certainly for every single institution, and then we repeat that process across 2,500 other institutions, standardizing the data and ensuring that everybody has that real bird's eye view of each and every entity within their organization. That's your clients. But then what we can actually do is expand that approach for external accounts. Because as you can imagine, when I send a wire payment, that receiver, there's rich details there. When I send an ACH payment, there are rich details within that file. So what you can do is across 2,500 institutions, resolve those entities. So you take a piece of wire data from here, you take a piece of RTP data from here, you take a piece of ACH data from here, and you bring those together, and then you start to understand the counterparty. And that's what allows you to understand what's outside your own four walls. Has this particular counterparty committed fraud anywhere in the network in the past? Or do they have a history of being a good receiver? So we've combined that approach of both NASDAQ Verafin financial accounts and non-NASDAQ accounts outside our network to give us insight into almost, I'm going to say almost 600 million, because it's growing each and every day, almost 600 million account profiles. That's what allows you to have that end-to-end view. And this is an approach that does effectively detect fraud. When we look at the ACH rules that have been coming from NACHA, they stress the importance of understanding the entirety of a transaction. We would be remiss to think we could understand the entirety of a transaction by only using one half of the transaction. So it's time to start looking at consortium data, but also safe frameworks where we can share intelligence while protecting PII. Now, we do have an ebook to complement the presentation today, Understanding Fraud Schemes and Scams. It's not an audiobook, but can you imagine me reading an audiobook to everybody every night as they went to sleep, Dave? I don't think anybody wants that. So this is not an audiobook with me. It is an old school book. You'll have to read it. But it is at verafin.com, and we would encourage everybody to pick this up. And it's not only a great resource for yourselves who've attended here today, it's a great resource to share within your institution. Also, we would encourage everyone to download the 2024 Global Financial Crime Trend Report, not only delving even in more detail into some of the trends that we've seen today, but there are also more stories about the faces behind these crimes, and that's the most important part. And listen, if you want to learn more and you want to schedule a custom demo, how about you contact my new friend, Karen? She's the VP of Business Development at myleverage.com. And please, you can email her, you can phone her. I'm sure you can send a snowy owl, Harry Potter style, to Karen, and she would be more than happy to take the relationship go from there. But if anything today has piqued your interest, please reach out. And with that, the last thing I want to mention is our online resource center. This is a free resource center that's filled with a ton of materials, case studies, ebooks, fact sheets, and so much more. This is great for supporting your own understanding. It's also a great resource internally as you build training programs or understanding of crimes and the modern landscape that we all must deal with. And again, it changes every single day, which is why I love coming to work. All right, Dave, I think that's my last slide. And I'm almost right on time.
That was great. Thank you, Corey. Hey, I have a question for you.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit more about AI usage and some of the scams that you've seen?
Yeah, absolutely. So AI is certainly everywhere. So one of the things we've been seeing more and more of is around the notion of voice spoofing. Video spoofing is rather new, but voice spoofing is something that has actually become much more commonplace. All you really need is a very quick voice sample from someone, which you can, I mean, let's be honest, you hop on social media, it's not hard to get a sample of someone's voice, but once you have a very minimal sample, you can then in real time spoof those voices. And that's something that we see over and over. It's getting more complex because again, you're preying on the nature of the person who is speaking to someone they love, and also how critical it is that this happen quickly. It's that sense of urgency that's being created. So that's certainly one way that we've seen it. I think the other way is just in the ability to create dedicated resources for phishing scams. You can actually tailor things very quickly to unique individuals or organizations. You can take a template of something that you'd like to say, and then simply use artificial intelligence or Gen AI to generate very personalized schemes and scams towards one person. And you can do that without very much effort, right? This is what I want to say. This is the victim. Craft me the perfect email to send to them. And unfortunately, as you well know, those tools, those Gen AI tools, the large language models, they have learned so fast and they're so good at doing these things quickly that it's really allowed the fraudsters to expand at an unprecedented scale.
Thank you. We have a question here from, I hope I'm saying this correctly, Ada. One of the biggest frustrations we experience is when we are certain a member is a victim of a scam, but they are adamant that the transactions are legitimate. Any recommendations on how to handle?
Okay, so there's two things I'm going to say here. That is an absolutely huge problem. And not only that, there have been times, many times, where you actually have someone who's become a victim several times, even though you've tried to educate them out of it. So how do you educate people out of something like this? Or if they're trying to, again, obfuscate what's actually happening and adamant that this is legitimate, that is absolutely where an understanding of that counterparty comes into place. Because an understanding of the counterparty gives you more information to have a cogent, intelligent conversation. You can imagine if I pull up to you, Dave, and you say, Corey, did you mean to send this transaction? I'm going to say, absolutely, I did. And you might say, well, no, but this is a scam. It's not. I think it is. I think it isn't. That becomes a he said, she said. But when you're able to say, no, we've actually looked at the counterparty in this transaction, we can see that across a network of thousands of institutions, we have seen fraudulent payments go to this particular entity in the past. We know this is a fraudulent payment. You don't know it because of what's happened. And then you can actually take the time to walk through what the typology is. So if it's someone who's been scanned for a romance scam, that's when you say, okay, so you say this is real. So how did you meet this person? I need to understand a little bit more. And specifically, if you stopped the transaction, this is so important. Real-time transaction monitoring. You stop the transaction, they're telling you to send it. Okay, well, I want to send this for you. Help me understand who this is. How have you met them? Da, da, da. Because when I look, I can see this is a known fraudster. So we're trying to protect you. And it just allows you to have conversations. So the really important thing is to understand the typology, the questions that you're going to need to extricate from that person, the information you need, and then also ensure that you have an understanding of that counterparty, because that's really how you fight it, by knowing more about the counterparty than the victim does.
Okay. Well, I think we're about out of time. We're a minute over. Corey, thank you so much for your time today. It was an excellent presentation, very invigorating, engaging, as always. And I want to thank everybody for attending, for taking part of your valuable time today. And I want to just say that we're going to be having our next webinar is actually on Tuesday, September 24th, same time, 11 o'clock Eastern Time. And it's titled Cybersecurity, Current Threats, Most Recent NCUA Exam Findings, and Regulatory Compliance. And we will have an NCUA Regional Information Systems Officer presenting. So again, thank you very much for your time and have a great rest of your day.